So Craig, I want to talk about, you have a point of view on like the best way to get utilization out of your host team. And you have a way of thinking about this. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think for people watching, this is something that I would encourage everybody to go back and audit the time spent by the host team, because everything, like really, you can categorize all host activities into 3 different buckets, right? They're either doing outbound sales, right? They're driving incremental trips that wouldn't have happened otherwise, kind of a layer on top of direct mail. Like, are they touching the customers, inviting them in? And you can see here on the screen, you've got the 3 activities with their revenue impact. So outbound sales, that's driving trips that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Next is customer FaceTime, building the relationship. Obviously, there's value there, right? If a player likes the host, they're more likely to come in there. So that is good for the casino. It's building value, but you can't measure the outcome. It's not as tangible of a incremental revenue as outbound sales. I got a trip booked that wouldn't have happened if I didn't pick up the phone or send that text or email. Then there's administrative tasks. So once a player says, yeah, I want to come into that tournament, book me a room, how much work is the host having to do to make that happen? Or, yeah, what kind of work are you making the host do to track their activities, right? Because a lot of times it's, hey, you need to log every call, every phone conversation. If it's not, if those are 2 separate systems, you're asking the host to do work and then do some work to talk about the work they just did. So look at your host team and try to break down like how many hours are spent in each of these buckets. And then if we go to the next slide to talk about just the value of increasing the time spent in outbound sales, this is just simple math, right? We're assuming, if we look in the top left, it's trips booked per hour. So depending on the skill of the host or the tools they have in place, some hosts may book more trips per hour than others, but essentially you can come up with a number across the board that if my hosts sat down for 1 hour to just try to sell, how many trips could they book on average per host per hour? Then how much time do they have to dedicate to that activity? And then lastly, how much on average are the players worth that they're talking to per trip? So if we go down, just making round numbers, if on average right now it's 2 trips per hour that your hosts can do, on average their hosted players, every time they walk in the door, stay overnight, it's worth $1,000 per trip. And right now the hosts have 10 hours per week of outbound marketing. So they are driving $20,000 of incremental revenue from their outbound sales activity. Now think about if you can adjust a couple key metrics, if you can make them more skilled at selling, get more trips per hour out of the time they already have, and if you can cut down the administrative tasks to give them more time to sell, look how big of a jump that is. So if you move them from 2 trips per hour to 2.5 trips per hour, and then go from 10 to 15 hours per week in outbound sales, that is a $17,000 increase in revenue per week. And the math kind of speaks for itself. So the question was, how do you get the most out of your team? It's really like, boil it down to that. All right, how much time are they spending in each of these buckets? And then how do we get them more effective when they're selling, and how do we give them more time to sell?
Yeah. It's a great point. Let's talk really quickly about the mechanisms that the host can use to actually have the most impactful conversations with players to actually drive this math of a host productivity. And one of the things that you guys did in your surveys, you looked at the methods to communicate with your host. What were the preferred methods? And I wanted you to talk a little bit about some of these things that came out of the survey, which was actually very interesting, how there was this stark breakdown between email, text versus phone call and in person.
Yeah, and I should clarify. So when we let players pick more than one. Okay, so it was like 70-something% said text, 60-something% said email, maybe it was 48% said phone. But this is email or text, and then phone only. I don't want to do email or text. I just want to do phone or in person. Okay, I just want to show up and talk to my host. I don't want to be communicated with outside the casino. But the reason why we broke it down this way is if you're looking at I've got this limited resource of host time to go out and sell. What is the most effective way to do it? Email and text is the way to get the message out to the players as fast as possible. How do you reach the most players in the minimal amount of time? It's email and text. Phone, it's valuable. I wouldn't say throw away the phones, like you still want to talk to players, but I would look at that not as in the outbound selling bucket. I wouldn't put phone time in there. That's more in the building relationships bucket, making the trips better. Because like email and text, actually we didn't make a slide for it, but I think it would be useful to talk about. Was like one of the questions we asked was, one of the host jobs is to sell the property, promote, get you in the door. What do the hosts that do it effectively, what do they do? And players overwhelmingly were saying what John and Leah talked about earlier. It's like, I just want to know what's going on. I want to be informed. And so you're not selling them, a new car or a new computer system. You don't need to call and be like, hey, did I tell you about the new suites we have? That can be effective, but really we're selling for your host team to sell. It's about just telling the players what's going on and being top of mind. So when they do have a free weekend, to get the ding, it's, oh yeah, there's this tournament, great, I'm going to go to that, and they can reply and get it booked. So phone, it can be an effective selling tool, but you want to look at the time it takes to call and then the conversion rate. So why don't we go to the next slide, because this is really interesting too, on text versus email open rates. We don't have phone open rates, but I'll just ask the audience, like, when your phone rings, how often are you answering it? Like, what's the percentage of phone calls that you answer? Even if it's from, a friend or a relative, a lot of times, you're busy, you don't answer it. Email open rate, so between email and text, they're about equally, well, depending on the system you have, they can take about an equal amount of time to send. But there's a stark difference in the open rate because we all get a million emails a day. So sometimes an email will get buried. So if players are open to receiving text, and your property probably has like a canned text, thumbs up, thumbs down, but even if in your player management system, they're not flagged as canned text, your hosts are probably already communicating with them through the phone, through their own phones. Text is the most effective way to get the message to the player. If the goal, like the players say, is just tell me what's going on and I'll make the decision, text is the most effective way. I mean, phone, again, it's great. It's just when you have a limited resource, it's not the most effective way to get done. Because if you look at it as a spectrum of like, I want to tell a player about an event, how much time is it taking the host? On the one hand, you've got direct mail. My host isn't even going to do anything. I'm just going to hope they get it in the mailbox and they're going to show up. On the other end is asking your host to get in their car and drive to each player's house and hand deliver an invitation, right? Then, and you look at everything in between, you got phone call more on the drive to the player's house side, and then you have email and text on the other side. And when you look at just bang for your buck, what's going to drive the most revenue per minute, per hour of outbound sales time? It's text messaging.